Hi, thanks for watching. Okay, so in this video, I want to try to explain completely, okay, to completely explain why I feel so uncomfortable with the Amanda Knox case. Okay, I feel very uncomfortable. Now, I'll say it right off the bat. Part of the problem here, I think, is the Italian authorities, the Italian prosecutors, the Italian investigators. I think they did a terrible job. Okay, so in a way, if the investigators and the prosecution can't put a good case together, okay, in a way, okay, they are responsible for this case not being solved, right? Um, and also, like, nobody should go to jail. Okay, nobody should go to jail if the investigators and the prosecutors can't put together a good case. So, that part, I can't change that, and that's just the way it is. Okay, but just to summarize this case, this Amanda Knox case concerns the murder of her roommate. Okay, when Amanda Knox was in her early 20s, a young college student from Seattle, she was studying abroad in Perugia, Italy. Okay, so she was studying in Italy, and one of her roommates was another university student from England. She was an English, a British, a young person of a similar age, but a little more sophisticated and probably better educated. Okay, this was Meredith Kercher. Okay, so Meredith Kercher was living with Amanda Knox. Okay, and they did not get along. Okay, so this is a roommate with whom she did not get along. All right, and I can't help this. Okay, but ever since this case, from the very beginning all the way to the present, Amanda Knox has minimized and has not squarely addressed. Okay, and she lies around this. Okay, the nature of her relationship and her feelings toward Meredith Kercher. Okay, now why would Amanda Knox continue to not be able to be honest and not be able to touch this such a key point that she did not get along with a roommate? Okay, and why is this relevant? All right, it's relevant because I understand. Okay, Rudy Gede is like some habitual criminal. He's a black guy from Italy. Originally he's like from West Africa, but he was like adopted and raised in Italy, and he was like a habitual recidivist criminal. Okay, but the thing is that Rudy Gede, his crimes were basically just like breaking into houses and just like stealing and stuff. He doesn't necessarily fit the profile of somebody who would commit a rage killing. Okay, I mean, he may not, but just chances are just somebody who is just typically just somebody who just like breaks and enters into houses and steals does not necessarily fit the profile of somebody who would commit a rage killing, right? So right there. And then secondly, a knife killing is very personal. All right, so on the table, more likely the profile of the person who killed Meredith would be somebody who has like substantial emotional problems, okay, and somebody who actually personally knows Meredith, right? I mean, it's on the table, right? And also, too, in the crime scene, people were saying, okay, the reason why Amanda's a suspect is because a woman had to be a person who would cover the corpse, who would cover Meredith's body with like a blanket, because that's a way of like a woman having sympathy for another woman being naked. Okay, but that doesn't fit the way I see the crime scene. Okay, when I saw the crime scene, you could interpret it that way, but you could also interpret it that, and the way I saw it was, it looked like Meredith was left like a piece of trash at the bottom of a pile of trash. Okay, that's another way to interpret it, and I think that's more consistent with the injuries to her neck. Okay, somebody had savaged her neck. Okay, and it was kind of like overkill with the knife, right? Like overkill. Okay, and so that doesn't necessarily match, I don't think, the profile of just like somebody who has a history of breaking into houses and stealing, like petty crime. It really speaks more to a person who may not have a criminal history, but who has major emotional issues. Okay, just like Jodi Arias. Jodi Arias did not have a history of, let's say, actually, it's funny because Jodi Arias did have a history of stalking. Okay, let's just say that. But Jodi Arias didn't have any criminal history on paper. She wasn't really, on paper, she wasn't a criminal. She did have issues, okay, for sure. But I think Jodi Arias is a person who, like Amanda Knox, had serious emotional problems. Okay, and I think Jodi Arias's emotional problems are very similar to Amanda Knox. They're not identical. Okay, but they both present as very composed, very, very composed people who are not in touch with, like, say, the more troubling aspects of their emotional reality. They live in almost like this serene, almost unreal serene composure, this poise, this like almost impossible poise. And I think both Jodi Arias and Amanda Knox sort of present to me sort of almost like a hypnotic trance where they sort of hypnotize and trance themselves. Like they sort of hypnotize themselves into a trance of this almost unbelievable composure, okay, which to a person, looking objectively, it looks a little weird, okay. And I'm sorry, but that is a real emotional problem. And anytime a person is sort of like in a trance and almost like hypnotically distanced from their more troubling emotional reality, okay, then what happens is that emotional reality is sort of like dislodged from your executive control. Okay. And these are the kind of people who can have bizarre flare ups or incidents where they can do something completely out of character. Okay. Because they're not in touch with their own emotional reality. They don't know when they're angry. They don't know when they're feeling violent. And so maybe there may be just one or two times in life where they could be like provoked in a way where they could do something so out of character. Okay. That there is even a risk with people like this that they could have a little bit of dissociative amnesia where they wouldn't even necessarily remember it, or they would have partial memories of some really explosive event. Okay, so the bottom line is, I think that Meredith, the way she was actually killed, and the way her body was placed at the crime scene, I think that suggests to me the profile of somebody closer to Amanda Knox, in the sense that it looks to me like not so much necessarily how, let's say, some random petty criminal would kill somebody, but it looks more like the way she would be killed, let's say, by a person who has emotional problems and a person who actually personally knew Amanda, because knife killing is very personal. Okay, who knew Meredith, right? So the killer would have to be. I mean, I'm just saying a good profile. A good profile for the murderer would be somebody who actually knew Meredith and somebody who had emotional problems. Okay. And then if you really want to get creative, because it looks like the scene was staged so that it would appear as though there was a break-in, right? And this is something we can't get around this. It does appear as though the house was set up to make it look like somebody broke in, right? Where like a rock was thrown and things were strewn about, but nothing was stolen really. Okay, so it looks as though the scene was staged. So then you could add to that, that the profile would be somebody who has emotional problems, somebody who actually personally knew Meredith Kercher, and maybe somebody who might have a background in theater. I don't know. I mean, hey, that's a little bit reaching, I'll admit, but it actually fits the profile, okay? Because Amanda Knox actually had a background in theater and, whatever. But the bottom line is, there are some serious questions about this case, right? Serious questions, right? And Amanda has not been able to be honest, even to this day, about some of the key problems with this case, okay? And the key problems to this case, if it's true, okay, that the person who killed Meredith was somebody who actually knew her and somebody who had a lot of dissociated rage towards Meredith, right? Why is it that right on that very issue, okay, like how did I feel about my roommate, okay, in the face of other independent evidence that she did not get along with Meredith, right? Okay, why is it that Amanda Knox to this day, she can talk in detail and in truth about so many things, but when it comes to how she actually feels about Meredith, okay, even to this day, that's an area where I think it's obvious that Amanda Knox cannot tell the truth. It's just too disturbing, and she cannot get there. She just cannot get there, right? Even to this day. Okay, so that's what basically leaves me with the discomfort. Okay, combined with the fact that even though it is true, I'll be honest. Like Rudy Guede, he may be the one who killed. He may be the one who killed Meredith Kercher, right? I'm not saying he didn't. Okay, but there are so many things about the way Meredith was killed that suggests that Rudy doesn't really have the profile. And on top of that, it looks like somebody staged the house to make it look like a break-in. Okay, so that makes it look like maybe Rudy was set up where he was having, let's say, maybe consensual sexual contact with Meredith, right? And then when he takes a break to go to the bathroom, maybe somebody very, very quickly took advantage of that situation, very, very quickly. Okay, and then after Rudy got out of there, they may have set up the house to make it look like it was a break-in, to make it look like Rudy did this, right? And so the bottom line is, just because there are a lot of obvious circumstances here, Why would Rudy be in a house where somebody staged it to look like a break-in? That doesn't make any sense. And also, why would he voluntarily leave feces in the toilet, like, or even by accident? If he really was so consciously guilty of killing somebody, he wouldn't dare leave his feces in the toilet. It looks as though, and I'm not saying this is what happened, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that Rudy was interrupted while he was unguardedly, let's say, going to the bathroom, right? He's in the bathroom, and it really just in an unguarded moment that somebody else came in, did something terrible, and then made the scene look like he could be guilty for it, right? Like setting him up for it. Okay. And has there ever been a person in this case who wrongfully accused a black man who just made something out of thin air, and dishonestly framed a black man for this crime? Oh my God. Amanda Knox. Okay. Amanda Knox, when she was supposedly tortured by the police. Okay. And she may have been tortured. All right. But of all the lies she could tell, and she says, "Oh yeah, I told a lie. They made me lie. I didn't know what was going on." So after she's tortured by the Italian police, of all the lies she can make up, she's framing a black man for this crime. Okay. And that's before supposedly she even knew that Rudy had anything to do with this. And Rudy's another black guy, right? And so how is it that when she's tortured and she's forced to lie, why is it that her lie is framing a black person when supposedly she had no idea that a black person was actually there, right? To me, that kind of, since the scene is set up as though it looks as though somebody took an opportunity, all right, while let's say a black guy was having a consensual relations with Meredith, right, taking an opportunity to do something very quickly, very viciously, and then make it look like he was good for it. Why is it that later Amanda, having no knowledge of anything, she would just out of thin air frame a black guy for this, right? That to me is very weird. Okay, very weird. So it just adds another layer of circumstantial evidence that's like, my God, this is just, it's crazy, and it does make her look very bad. And I think to this day, on the two issues, okay, why did you frame a black guy when coincidentally a black guy was actually responsible for this, supposedly? Okay, how could that happen? She gives very unsatisfying, very empty, very, very superficial, very shallow explanations, okay? And then when she's ever questioned about another core issue, how did you feel about your roommate? That's a very core issue of this case, okay? Because obviously somebody who killed Meredith would have had to know her, I think. That's the profile. It looks like somebody who knew her personally and who had a lot of rage towards her. And why is it that on that issue, even to this day, Amanda just cannot be honest? Okay, so I'm going to use this video to go deep dive. I'm going to deep dive into this, and I'm going to show videos, and I'm going to really deep dive this to try to explain why I am uncomfortable. And then I think I'm going to surprise people. Okay, I'm not going to conclude that Amanda's a psychopath. Okay, I'm not going to conclude that she's even necessarily a narcissist. I think she has narcissistic symptoms, okay? But I think her core issue is really something very emotional. I think she has an emotional problem that I think could result in some dissociative amnesia. It's just a theory, all right? Please don't get upset. But that's what I think is the most realistic explanation, because I think there are also a lot of other signs and a lot of other evidence that Amanda is not necessarily a bad person, okay? And that I think she wants to be a good person. Okay. But I do think that Amanda minimizes serious questions about this case. Okay. And I think she just cannot be honest about her true feelings towards her former roommate. Okay. Meredith. And so those things to me are real issues, right? So, where I want to start with this is I want to start with how today, okay, Amanda Knox is like supposedly, she's like this major champion of like the rights of the wrongfully accused, okay? And she's like supports people, the wrongfully accused being exonerated from crimes, right? This is like a big movement for her, right? And, I think on paper that sounds great. Nobody should be wrongfully accused, okay? But the problem is that her case, I think, still has a lot of serious questions, okay? And so I think she, in her like passion to be like an advocate for the wrongfully accused, I think she is in a way unconsciously minimizing the serious questions that remain about how Meredith Kercher was actually killed. It was a very complicated case. It wasn't a simple break-in. It wasn't simple. It wasn't obvious. I think the fact that Rudy Guede left feces in the toilet, it suggests like he was in an unguarded moment in the bathroom and something surprised him. Okay. And then later it looks like somebody made the house look like somebody had broken in. So it's like a stage scene. And also, like, Rudy doesn't necessarily have the psychological profile to do a rage killing. So, I mean, the whole thing is a little weird. Okay. And so I want to start with a video clip where Amanda today she's an advocate for the wrongfully accused. And here she is in a video. Let's watch this, okay, where she is in a way kind of defending Alex Murdaugh in South Carolina, right? How all these YouTube experts are, and now they're like interfering with these trials where they're getting into like the body language, and you have all these YouTube experts who think they can like psychoanalyze people, and they're like contaminating these cases and wrongfully, let's say, slanting public opinion away from people who are accused of terrible crimes, right? And so, by the way, let me just say this, I feel uncomfortable on YouTube. I do feel uncomfortable. Okay, I think Amanda actually has a point, right? I think it is an interference with law enforcement and with the judicial process to have all these YouTube opinions, affecting public, all these YouTube influencers affecting public opinion. And I do think sometimes we overinterpret cases and we overanalyze things. Okay, so yes, I'm uncomfortable with that. But on the other hand, okay, I still think that sometimes the public has a right to talk about cases that have a lot of uncomfortable problems. All right. And I think that in the case of Alex Murdaugh, for example, I think it is a very uncomfortable case. Okay. And I think there are some serious questions. Right now, how can I say this? I mean, like, on the one hand, like, I do see a problem with YouTube, and I'm admitting that, right? But that doesn't take away the fact, okay, that the Amanda Knox case in Italy, that there are a lot of serious questions. So if she's going to criticize YouTube, that's fine. Go ahead, criticize YouTube, but also be honest and please admit that your case is not as simple as you want people to think it is, right? So let's start with Amanda, criticizing YouTube, and then let's see how she is guilty, I think, of the same thing she's criticizing, because Amanda will criticize the YouTube, influencers, but then whenever she has a chance, she acts as an influencer in public to try to minimize the actual serious questions and complexity of the Meredith Kercher murder. Okay, so let's first start by listening to what Amanda has to say about Alex Murdaugh. Okay, I think this is very interesting.
Yeah, we were just watching that big trial last week in North Carolina or South Carolina. I forget the guy's name now, but at any rate, he didn't act the way he should have if he was really grieving. He looks like he's acting the way he would have if he shot them. How does anybody have any idea how they would react if their roommate was murdered? I mean, I have no idea.
That's
what's
the
normal?
Alex Murdaugh case.
Alex Murdaugh, that's it. Yeah.
And I haven't actually followed that case closely, but what I do know is that there, once again, as with many of these cases, there are all these YouTube channels where people are basically expressing themselves as behavioral experts who are looking at his trial testimony and are deciding based upon these subtle cues that they can read into his true nature. And I feel like that is our desperate need to understand something that is very difficult to understand, which is why somebody would murder their wife and child. And I think we are looking for patterns. We are pattern seekers where patterns are not reliable.
Okay, so let's give her credit. What she says may be a fair criticism, right? So then why does she do the same thing? Okay, when she looks back and say Rudy Gede, okay, why does she analyze just like we do? She looks at the patterns and she tries to take a very complicated case, right? And she just trashes this guy Rudy Gede, and she's just so convinced that he's guilty. Okay, when at the same time, right now, she's supposed to be an advocate for the wrongfully accused. Okay, she does the same thing with Rudy Gede. Okay, on the one hand, she wants us to believe that we shouldn't come to judgment so quickly. We shouldn't try to like interpret things and then wrongfully accuse people. All right. And that it's unfair for us. But then she, as an influencer, she looks back and she simplifies the case against Rudy Gede. She interprets things the way she wants to. And then she simplifies a very complex case against Rudy. Okay. This case is not so simple against Rudy. There are a lot of complicated issues. And she just simply, in a very simple way, she comes to this very emotional conclusion that he's responsible. And in a way, she is committing exactly the same she's committing the same mistake as a public influencer. So let's take a look at what she has to say about Rudy Gede so we can see that she's doing exactly the same thing.
For the man who committed this murder, he left DNA all over Meredith's body. He left his footprints and fingerprints in her blood in the crime scene. He was a burglar who was known to commit crimes like these, and yet, for all the international attention this case received, very few people know his name. His name is Rudy Gede. He murdered Meredith. But the public and the prosecution and the tabloid media all decided to focus on me instead, as if my demeanor or what clothes I was wearing that day or what what it looked like if I was looking this way or that way somehow held some deep truth about what happened. And it's not true.
Okay, so we as YouTubers, we're not allowed to interpret things, okay, and we're not allowed to, like, say, unfairly bring our prejudices as we look at people that we don't like, and as we assess the evidence. We're not allowed to suspect that maybe Alex Murdaugh, did something, but she is allowed to interpret a very complicated case and to make it very simple, right? And to I think really dismiss some of the real problems with the Meredith Kercher murder, and just come to the conclusion that a black guy did it, right? Now, why do I say that, right? I say that because even today, she cannot explain why, when she was being tortured by the police, okay, she came up with this fantastical story that a black guy was responsible, right? So she already has a history of wrongfully framing a black guy, okay, for this very same crime, right? And she can't explain how, even though she's going to say, oh, they broke my mind, they made me go crazy, they made me say things I didn't even know what the truth was, it's all the police's fault. Yeah, maybe the police cracked your egg, okay, and maybe what they did was torture, but when the egg cracked, you revealed what was inside of you in that cracked egg. And you had it in your mind, the pattern that maybe a black person was responsible, right? And so, because this is a very complicated case, okay, and Amanda did not say in that interview that we just saw, she could have mentioned that the police had reason to believe that the scene was staged to make it look as though it was a burglary, right? It was staged to make it look like someone broke in the house, right? So that would add complication. Also, she doesn't really fully wrestle with the fact that why would a person who knows that they're going to be killing or is just killed, why would they leave feces in the toilet? You know what I mean? It almost looks as though possibly that Rudy was in an unguarded moment in the bathroom when maybe something else came and happened very quickly, right? And maybe Rudy said that he later went and saw Meredith bleeding, and that because he was a coward, he left her there. That would explain why he would be in contact with her blood and all that. The bottom line is, look, we don't know what actually happened, but don't pretend it's such a simple case. Don't pretend there aren't serious issues, okay? Don't just minimize the fact that it looks like it was staged to appear as though there was a breaking and entering, right? So that would look like an effort to frame a black guy, right? And then, whoa, pure coincidence. Amanda has a history of framing black people for the same crime, right? So, like, don't come to me with all this simple. She's making this simple reading of the patterns to try to make a very simple analysis, and she criticizes YouTubers for doing the same, when she herself has a history of framing black people for this very crime. Okay, so now what I'd like to do is let's take a look at how she explains how she actually framed another black guy for this, and she admits that she was lying. Okay, and let's see how she explains this. Okay,
From what he's spoken out about is that they were putting him through the very same, very dreadful interrogation, and they pushed him to agree that while he was asleep, he couldn't say that I was with him. And so he signed a statement saying that, yes, while he was asleep, he couldn't say I was there with him. And then the cops came to my room and said, your boyfriend has turned against you. We know you're a liar. You need to tell us what we already know. We know you went out that night. We know you met with someone.
So what did you do? Did you stick to your story, or did you?
I mean, by that point, I was so scared and confused that I did not know what was the truth anymore. Like, I don't know if you've ever had this experience, but, and amazingly, this happens so often in wrongful convictions. Almost 1 in 4 wrongfully convicted people end up giving false admissions. But what the police tell you is, we know what the truth is. You don't remember the truth. Let us tell you what the truth is. And if you don't agree to it, you're never getting out of prison again. And so they made me believe that I had forgotten what happened because I was so traumatized. And what they asked me to do was to not keep telling them the same story, but to imagine something else. Imagine what the truth was.
Okay, well, that's fine. To imagine what the truth was, right? To imagine what the truth was, except that what she said when she was cracked by the police, when the police cracked her egg and made her go crazy, okay? Imagine what the truth was, except that what she said was actually very, very close to what actually happened, okay? And in fact, unconsciously, when they cracked her egg and she just started making up a bunch of BS, okay, she unconsciously suggested something that really does match what really happened, okay? That there was a Black person in the house, okay? And that somehow she's trying to make it appear as though that Black person is guilty of the crime, okay? That's kind of like the gist of what she actually said when she was supposedly insane and didn't know what the truth was. Now, she wasn't telling the police the truth, but to say that she didn't know what the truth was, I think she was very aware what the truth was, but she wasn't going to give that to the police. Okay, so she's making herself out to be somebody who was broken by the police. And instead, what I think she did is she gave them falsehood. All right, she said a lie. She framed a Black guy. Okay, but she was very careful. How would you say? She was very careful to make somebody else responsible. But what she was doing unconsciously was she was revealing exactly her role, I think, in the actual murder, which that maybe she set up the murder to make it look like another Black person was responsible. All right. Now, again, this is just I am just speculating, right? But it is so uncanny. Okay. That of all things she could make up, when the police are breaking her brain, okay, and cracking her egg, and she now doesn't know anything about reality. You know, she's on Mars. She is now not even part of planet Earth, okay. And of all the things she can make up, okay, what she makes up is remarkably close to something that matches setting up the house to make it look as though there was a break-in, okay, and also somebody being caught off guard while in the bathroom, right, and maybe interrupted, and then going to see somebody bleeding and then being a coward and leaving. Okay, it's remarkably coherent with what actually happened. And this is at a time, Amanda, when she gave this BS, when she just lied, basically, she says to the police, this was before anybody knew, supposedly, that Rudy, another Black guy, was actually there. Okay, so, hey, anything is possible, but this is such a remarkable coincidence, okay, that I don't think that Amanda has the right to minimize it. Okay, if this is a remarkable coincidence, then she needs to own that and say, hey guys, I'm sorry. When you look back on this case, it is incredibly coincidental that I would be appearing to frame a Black guy when I had supposedly no idea that another Black guy was actually involved. I mean, I have to admit, she could be more honest and say that is a whopper coincidence. Okay, but she can't do that because I think she's not comfortable with it, right? But now, to be fair to Amanda, right? And I want to be fair to Amanda, right? And I think some people are going to be upset at how fair I want to be to Amanda in this video. But to be fair to her, okay, you can also argue that Amanda is not 100% responsible for all of the similarities, okay, between or all the coincidences, okay, in the bullshit lie, the lies that she told the police under pressure, and what actually happened, right? In other words, the part about framing a Black person, now I think that's Amanda's responsibility, right? The police were putting her under pressure, but I don't think they were putting her under pressure to frame a Black person. Okay, I don't think that's what was going on. I think they were just trying to pressure her why is your cell phone history show a conversation with Patrick Lumumba? And so in that sense, the suggestion that a black person is involved, that actually came from her cell phone history. And so Amanda, like on the spot as she's being interrogated, she's not really responsible for that coincidence, the fact that there's another black person involved. Okay, but supposedly when Amanda was being interrogated, she had no idea that a black person, supposedly, right? She had no idea, supposedly, that a black person actually was at the scene, okay, around the time of the murder. Right? She had no idea. So she had no idea to make that final, that final connection that, of the dynamic of, let's say, framing a black person, right? And if you really look at the crime scene, okay, there is, and again, it's not conclusive evidence. Let's not pretend there's any conclusive evidence, but there is substantial, serious, circumstantial evidence, okay, suggesting that Filomena is the other roommate, okay, that her room was staged to appear as though there was a break-in, and it wasn't actually a break-in. Okay, there was a lot of electronics in Filomena's room that was never stolen, right? And so, I know the defense will have a reason for that, right? They'll have an explanation for that, but there is still some serious concerning evidence, very troubling evidence, that what looks like a break-in was not actually a legitimate break-in. So, I'm not saying for sure anything, right? We'll never know the actual truth, but if you're analyzing a case, at least we can take seriously and not dismiss, okay, that there is serious evidence, substantial evidence to suggest that what looks like a break-in in Filomena's room was not really a break-in. It was staged, that it was possibly staged to appear as a break-in, right? So already you have a situation where the crime scene is sort of starting to look like there was an effort to maybe try to frame somebody, right? And nobody knew at the time of Amanda's interrogation, right? Or at least Amanda wasn't supposed to know, supposedly, that an actual black person really was at the scene, at or about the time of the crime, right? So there shouldn't have been any reason for Amanda to think that there was a dynamic in the air, in the evidence, where a black person was being framed, okay, where there was efforts by somebody to make it look like a black person was responsible, right? So when Amanda was under pressure, and let's just concede, let's give to the defense that Amanda's not responsible for that one coincidence where she's suggesting on another black person, right? The fact that another black person is in the picture, right? Because her cell phone records that's being examined by the police, it already shows as another black person that she's talking to, right? Patrick Lumumba. So, we can't put on Amanda that she just made up out of thin air that another black person was involved. This was already suggested because the police was pressuring her. The police were pressuring her about her cell phone history, her texting history with her boss, Patrick Lumumba, right? So she's not responsible for that part, but she could have said anything involving Patrick Lumumba. If she was going to lie, she could just say, hey, she could make up a lie and not involve Patrick and just say, hey guys, that's just a coincidence. I can tell you what happened, but Patrick had nothing to do with it. That was one option. Okay. And believe me, if her head is broken and she's going to make stuff up, she doesn't have to have the maliciousness of including someone she knows is innocent, right? She knows that Patrick was working that night. So, she could have made up a lie and just excluded Patrick. Okay. Or she could have said something like, oh yeah, I'll make up a lie. Patrick and I were walking down the street and we heard a scream and we went to the house and oh my God, we saw things. She didn't have to make it so that he was actually responsible, like actually framing him. Okay. And so, again, you could argue, hey, the police may have suggested, hey, tell us that Patrick was responsible, possibly. Okay, I'll leave that on the table. But I'm just saying it still remains, even if you take away that part where, Amanda didn't just pull out of thin air, hey, a black guy was involved. She didn't just pull out of thin air the fact that he was black, okay, because that was already in her texting history. But we can still feel unsatisfied and we can still feel uncomfortable that in the end of all the lies that she would tell, she would render a lie that included the framing of a black person, okay, the false framing of a black person, when coincidentally the actual crime scene does suggest that efforts were made to frame a black person who was at the scene at the time, right? So that is still a serious enough coincidence, even though there's some asterisks on it, even though there's some footnotes and there's room for the defense to argue. I think there is still a substantial level of coincidence in, let's say, the content of what Amanda gave to the police when she lied to them under pressure, right? And it also suggests to me that, Amanda wasn't really as broken as she suggests. Okay, she suggests that she was completely broken, but it just seems to me that she was, even in her lie, even as she lied to the police, number one, she was being very, very careful not to give them actual truthful information, right? So even under pressure, even under, complete broken down, supposedly, she's actually giving the police false information, right? Which to me indicates that she was retaining some level of control over, let's say, her manufacturer and not wanting to tell the actual truth to the police, right? So, how broken was she? And also, I work in criminal defense, and I have dealt, I can't even remember all the cases I've worked on. Okay. And I have dealt with some cases where there were questions about too much police pressure. All right. But I have never run across a case myself where a person has been actually broken into psychosis under what really wasn't that much police pressure. I'll be honest. It was 50 hours, approximately 50 hours of a police interview over, I think, 5 days. So that was about 10 hours a day. I mean, that's quite a bit, but, it's not that, how would you say, it's above average. It's above average, but it is not it's not at the level that even United States courts would call like torture. So, I'm leaving open that maybe Amanda herself subjectively, maybe she felt that she was being tortured. Maybe she did break a little bit, maybe she was going a little bit crazy. But I can just say that even by American standards, 10 hours a day, I think you would have to go a little longer than 10 hours. I think you'd have to do something a little more severe in the United States system to be considered like torture, like torturing a prisoner or like forcing a confession. So, I'm going to leave that on the table, but I still think there's something remarkably too much of a coincidence in the way that Amanda, gave a lie to the police, but the lie had sort of at its core that dynamic of framing a Black person, when in reality, it looks like the crime scene was actually kind of set up by somebody to sort of possibly frame a Black person. I think that's just too much of a coincidence. And at least, even if it's not enough to give me like a firm belief, like I still don't know what I really think about this case, but that coincidence is big enough, okay, that I think Amanda should be a little more honest about it, because otherwise what she's going to do is she's going to leave a lot of people feeling like she's not really credible. And it's also going to make Amanda look like she's trying to kind of spin the story in her favor, right? And she does this in other ways too. We'll see like in some clips, and I'll play one right now, where she'll really emphasize something that is actually not absolutely true. Okay, she'll sort of emphasize when she retells the story, even today, that Meredith Kercher was raped and murdered. Okay, and she wants to keep kind of reinforcing that. Well, in reality, Meredith wasn't really raped. Okay, there are signs that she had, like, say, bruising around her genitals and some suggestion. Okay, but she was actually still wearing a tampon, and there was no actual semen found inside of her. Okay, so it appears as though she wasn't really raped. There may have been sexual things happening. Okay, but that's just one example of where Amanda actually kind of like exaggerates the actual truth. The actual truth is probably a little more clinically neutral, okay? But Amanda wants to take a more extreme position as she tells the story. And what would be her motive for doing that? And also, Amanda has actually gone on record as saying that she opposes, investigations into crimes where people are just telling stories, as opposed to being scientific, as opposed to being neutral and scientific, and just taking like a scientist approach, So let's listen to Amanda, talk about how she believes an ideal crime investigation would be. Okay, and then let's compare that to the way Amanda likes to spin the story today. Okay, so let's listen to that.
Until that moment, I was so sure that the courtroom was kind of like a scientific laboratory where a bunch of information gets boiled down to truth beyond a reasonable doubt.
And in fact, what I discovered is the courtroom was a battleground of storytelling, where like the most emotionally compelling story and not necessarily the most truthful wins.
Okay, well, actually, I kind of agree with her. I think that's a good observation. Okay, however, okay, we're going to see in another clip that Amanda is always repeating a very emotionally compelling story that is not actually as clinically accurate, I think, as the evidence would actually suggest in this case. Okay, the evidence in this case, again, there is evidence of some sexual something happening with Meredith. I'm not going to deny that, but it's not like full penetration, ejaculating, whatever. I'm just saying that, you want to be careful not to create the stock, emotionally charged image of somebody just being ravaged and raped and then murdered. Okay. Because that's also a very emotionally compelling story. Right. And Amanda is trying to sort of reinforce and reassert kind of this also emotionally charged alternative, which is of somebody being ravaged, raped, and killed, right? And so let's look at how she, even just in the slightest interview, where she's not even really specifically talking about anybody being raped or whatever, but she's talking more about being wrongfully accused, right? And she's trying to say that, being wrongfully accused is much more special and unusual than just the average ordinary case of where a woman gets raped and killed, and she's just trying to suggest that being raped and killed is a very common occurrence, whereas being wrongfully accused is like a more special occurrence. Okay. And so she's kind of suggesting, hey, she was just raped and killed. She was just raped and killed. That happens all the time to countless women. But she's also using a very emotionally charged image, which is that emotionally charged image of a woman being ravaged and raped and then killed, right? So she's using that, and she's using the emotion of it, I think, to try to hook people into, oh yeah, it had to be a rape and a killing. It had to be a rape and a killing. So she's engaging also in this kind of like storytelling, like the battle of the stories, like which story is going to attach into the public consciousness better. And she's just constantly drilling this suggestion of Meredith being raped and murdered. So let's take a look at this.
That usually happens to men, usually happens to disenfranchised men. I'm a young woman. Young women don't often get wrongly accused. It's more often that a young woman is going to be raped and murdered. And so I think about that and how countless women before her have suffered that fate.
Yeah, so I'm sorry. I mean, I think she is using that, that kind of like that stock image of being raped and murdered. It's kind of like, she is playing the game. She is playing the game of the competition of the stories, and it's also kind of funny how she's like, oh, and countless women have suffered that fate. She's also kind of putting it on the trash heap of this kind of like vulgar majority, right? The trash heap of a vulgar majority, right? All these women that have been, countless women who have been, raped and murdered, but me, I'm special because it's very rare for a woman of all people to be wrongly accused, So even in this casual comment where she's playing the battle of the stories, right? Exactly what she says the courtroom is not supposed to be, right? Exactly what she thinks her trial is not supposed to be. This battle of the stories. Even if she plays the battle of the stories, she also gets to be in this very privileged, special place of this rare case of a woman of all people who is wrongly accused, as opposed to the trash heap of all those countless women who are just raped and murdered. Oh, those vulgar multitude over there, but I'm special, So, I mean, I'm sorry, but it's not just that she actually plays the same game that she doesn't approve of, the way her trial was handled, right? She plays the same game, but she also occupies a very privileged place in that big population where there's this big trash heap of people that get raped and murdered, but then she's more special. And then I can't help but subconsciously reflecting back on the crime scene, how Meredith was left in a position where she looks like she's at the bottom of a heap of trash, like she's a piece of trash at the bottom of a pile of trash. So it's just another parallel to how I see the crime scene. And I think subconsciously, Amanda is kind of leaking out sort of her feelings about Amanda. Amanda's leaking out her feelings about Meredith, and just kind of leaking out sort of this contrast, how she's a more superior person, and other people are just on the multitudes of just countless women just being raped and murdered, sort of almost like reminiscent of like a trash heap, the trash heap of history of the vulgar multitudes who get raped and murdered. So, you know, um, something to keep in mind. The other thing in this case that really troubles me. Okay, now I'm kind of changing the subject. Okay, another thing that really troubles me is how Amanda is so opposed, okay, to people examining her demeanor, the way her eyes look, her posture, even let's say body language, whatever. She's so opposed to that. And, how do I feel about that? I'm not a big fan of body language. I'm not even a big fan of psychology, to be quite honest. I don't really like psychology. Okay. But do we want to take such an extreme position that we want to go ahead and say there should be no profiling? Okay. I mean, can we not at least admit, even me, I don't even like psychology. Okay. But profiling is a very important tool in not in solving a case, okay, but in investigating a case. Okay, I don't think people should be convicted based on profiling alone. Okay, I actually agree with that. I don't think that's fair. If the only thing I can do is find if the only thing I can do is find connections between Amanda's psychology and the crime scene, that should not be enough to convict her. I don't believe that. Okay, I think that profiling is a very useful tool in investigating a crime, so that you can start to locate, like, say, the profile of who would likely be the killer, right? That's partly how they discovered the Unabomber, right? In part, it was based on psychological profiles, and then later more investigative work, right? So I look at profiling as an important investigative tool at the preliminary, as a preliminary tool at the outset of a criminal investigation, so that you can start narrowing down who are the most likely suspects, right? But then you have to do the harder police work of actually connecting that person to the crime, right? So, I guess I'm with Amanda in the sense that she should not be convicted based on her demeanor, okay? But I think her demeanor and I think her psychology is important at the outset, as the police start ruling people out and start narrowing down who are the most likely suspects, okay? And then once they find a couple of suspects, okay, then to actually get it to a conviction, okay? I think they should do more than just profile. So, to a point, I understand Amanda, and I agree with her that she should not be convicted based on profiling. But I disagree that her demeanor and her behavior is totally irrelevant to the investigation. I think it can help police actually narrow down who are the most likely suspects, and then the police have the further additional responsibility to actually do the real police work and actually connect her to the crime. Okay, so let's just look again at how Amanda, doesn't like her demeanor and her facial expressions and her body language to be analyzed. And let's just be reminded of how much she doesn't like that. Okay, let's take a look at that.
But the public and the prosecution and the tabloid media all decided to focus on me instead, as if my demeanor or what clothes I was wearing that day or what what it looked like if I was looking this way or that way somehow held some deep truth about what happened. And it's not true.
Okay, well, okay. So I do have some sympathy for Amanda, because I do think there is something very indecent. I think there is something very indecent about scrutinizing a person's body language, about scrutinizing their behavior, how they look, how they behave. There is something indecent about it, but we have to balance that with the fact that we're dealing with a murder investigation, a serious murder investigation, where obviously the roommates are going to be at least persons of interest, okay? At least persons of interest. And it is a very serious investigation. So you sort of have to balance the indecency of scrutinizing people's personalities and demeanor, which is, it's intrusive, it's embarrassing, but balance that with the seriousness of the investigation. So nobody likes to be scrutinized. And a lot of people really are eccentric, okay? And I think there is something kind of unfair about like scrutinizing eccentric people when they're just eccentric, okay? Except that, honest to God, okay, I really don't think that the problem with Amanda, in the wake of this murder, I don't think it was that she was just eccentric, okay? I think even though people had difficulty putting words to it, right? Even I have trouble putting words to it, but some people are so eccentric and so strange that it is a little troubling. It's troubling in the context of the murder, right? I don't know that we really are able to put it into words, but I think as human beings, we know that when people have serious enough emotional personality issues, that even if they're not psychopaths, even if they're not monsters, they could still be potentially, there could be something that leaves people feeling uncomfortable. Okay. And I know that that feels very unfair for, let's say, an eccentric person who happens to be near a murder. That's unfortunate. And maybe at some point, maybe Amanda should get therapy, really, and really, deal with how much it hurt her to be scrutinized. So I leave that as, a point in her favor. But on the other hand, I have to say that I think there were aspects of her demeanor that to me were not just strange and eccentric, but also troubling. Okay. And I'm not trying to say she's a monster. My point here, I'm not trying to say she's a monster. I am suggesting that I think she may have some emotional problems. Okay. She may have some emotional issues. Okay. And I'm sorry she has to be scrutinized, right? But I think she may have some emotional issues that do deserve attention. Okay. Not to convict her, but in the preliminary of the investigation, to try to piece together, to make sense of the crime scene and to try to narrow down who are the most likely suspects. Okay, so I'm not convicting her. It's not convicting, but it is a preliminary investigative tool. Okay, and so I want to look at a couple of clips of Amanda being interviewed, I think years after the incident, right? But even then, as she's looking back, really just imagining, that like when they first discovered Meredith's body, okay, I can see signs, okay, of a kind of a detachment and kind of almost like a self-hypnosis. Okay. Now I realize there are people who have different degrees of like trying to avoid like serious, troubling emotional content, right? A lot of very normal people really don't like to get into very emotional things. They like to remain kind of distant. But I think in Amanda's case, I think it's remarkable. I think she has a remarkably, I think almost severe sort of pushing away, sort of detaching, sort of pulling herself away from serious emotional content. And she almost falls into what almost appears like a trance, like almost like a self-hypnosis, even as she tries to explain, like a situation. Instead of just being there present, she falls into sort of a hypnotic trance to sort of tell the story, but from a remote distance. Okay. And that seems to be so persistent and so severe in her case. That is an emotional problem, or it's at the very least, it's an emotional characteristic. Okay. And somebody like that, who is so removed and so like pushed away from emotional reality, where they like to see things from a trance, from like a remote viewing, like a self-hypnotic trance, where they don't want to like be present, and they want to sort of view it remotely and sort of manage the reality from remote viewing, so to speak, almost like in a hypnotic kind of thing. That suggests to me a very unusual kind of like emotional characteristic, right? A very unusual way of dealing with emotions, all right, which potentially, could potentially fall into the profile of a person who, if they were very upset with their roommate, okay, and if they did have, like, say, a flare up of rage at their roommate that they're not getting along with, okay, that they might be totally dissociated from that actual rage, where they're not really aware of their anger, okay, and that if they did explode in some, just highly unusual, just like a severe explosion of rage, they might not even remember it because they're so detached from it. This might be one of those very rare cases where you could actually have a dissociative amnesia or something like that. I'm not saying that's what happened, but it's on the table when you have somebody who has such a remarkably, apparently severe kind of emotional eccentricity, where they have almost like this bizarre, like, distancing from emotional reality, and they engage in almost like a self-hypnosis, like a trance. That to me would suggest somebody that you would at least want to look at very carefully as a candidate for, maybe explaining how the murder took place. So, I'm not convicting, but I am saying that as a preliminary, you can't ignore, severe, like, notable eccentricities in somebody who happens to be a roommate of the deceased person, a roommate of the person who was murdered, and a person who appears to have emotional issues. I'm sorry. It's just, it may be unpleasant. And, you know, I'm sorry to Amanda that she has to be like scrutinized, but at the same time, in the context of a murder investigation, I think it is legitimate, and I think it is a relevant piece of information, at least to begin the actual investigation of the crime. So let's take a look at a couple of clips of Amanda as she, you know, kind of describes the moments after or the moments as Meredith's body was actually discovered. Okay. And in the first clip, she talks about, you know, how the body was discovered, and she almost goes into this remote viewing trance as she sort of describes the scene, and she sort of sees from a distance how one of the roommates was like screaming and screaming and screaming, but it's almost like she was screaming. It's like, oh, the emotion was over there. And then it's like, oh, the body, like I didn't see the body, I was away, you know, instead of saying, oh, I wasn't close to the body, but she has this way of saying I was away, like that word away. It's not a specific word. It's almost like a disembodied remote view, you know, sort of like a trance distance or like a self-hypnotic distance. So let's just look at almost like the eerie strangeness of how she describes this. And as she describes it, she seems to be sort of in a trance, kind of almost a self-hypnosis, you know, kind of distant from the emotional content. So let's take a look at that.
And that's when they discovered Meredith's body. There was, Philomena immediately started screaming, just screaming. I did not see into the room. I was away.
Okay, so when we see that, it's almost like, oh, Philomena was screaming. She was screaming, but it's almost kind of like she's not feeling the screaming. Like even when I said it, I said the screaming, but no, she said the screaming. It was like the screaming is over there. The screaming, the emotion is over there. I'm away from it. You know what I mean? Now, I admit that's probably a lot of interpretation, right? So I'm not going to rely on that. I'm going to try to see that in connection with other pieces of evidence, because I don't want to over rely on one little fragment, right? So let's look at another clip where she is describing the same scene, okay, but she's trying to explain why she didn't understand, you know, how people were talking about a foot, and maybe she thought that a foot was severed from the body, and she's almost like in this like bizarre kind of like trance-like detachment, but engaging in this bizarre kind of imagination, where what occurs to her in her imagination is something extremely violent. Okay, and it actually did not happen. There was no foot was actually severed from the body, you know, but she imagined something like extremely violent, right? And it just kind of makes me wonder if maybe she doesn't have a lot of internal violence. It's like a Rorschach test, right? Like she's hearing like sounds and comments and you know, people screaming and people saying things, and she starts to imagine things, right? And it's almost like, you know, like a Rorschach test. She imagines something that is extremely violent, right? Something that I wouldn't have thought of, right? And it just kind of wonders if maybe she doesn't have some subconscious association of Meredith with extreme violence, right? Like deep down inside, she harbors like this extreme violence towards Meredith, or at least associated with Meredith, right? And then she laughs. Okay, she laughs as she thinks of the most violent possibility. Like she laughs about it. Now, you know, I understand people can have inappropriate laughter, right? But I'm not going to also just let it off the table, right? I think it describes to me someone who is not just detached, but their detachment is from their own violent, let's say, ideation, right? They have their own violent ideation, but it's sort of detached from their central processing reality. So let's take a look at it as she describes this, and let's look at the laughter. Okay, so let's look at how she laughs.
All I heard from her was blood and a foot. So she kept saying the words for blood and foot, and screaming, and was hysterical. And immediately the police like pushed us out of the, Raphael grabbed me and like shuffled me out, but we were told we have to leave now. And I remember slumping down by the front door, just outside of the front door, trying to make sense of what was being said. So I knew there was blood, and I knew there was a foot. And I thought that they were suggesting that there was a dismembered foot in the room. And, that would cause someone to be hysterical.
Okay, so if that is even just a representation, if that gives us even an idea of the person the police were dealing with, in the days following the actual murder, if that's the person, and if that's the kind of behavior and the kind of psychology that the police were encountering as they were interviewing Amanda, in the days following the murder, then I would understand, at least subconsciously, even if the police weren't able to articulate it as well as maybe we can now. I can understand why, at least subconsciously, for a police investigator, they couldn't help but notice that there's somebody who's living in the same house, someone who's close to the murder victim, who seems to have more than just eccentric personality. I would say somebody who seems to have some kind of emotional problems. Okay, and also, I think it's really important to stress that, as I look at the crime scene, and as I look at the whole context of this murder, I don't see a picture of, hey, let's look for the psychopath. Where's the monster who did this? Honest to God, when I look at the crime scene and I look at the how Meredith was killed, what comes to my mind is maybe somebody who had real emotional problems, who might have, like, say, a kind of a dissociated alienation from their own violent, aggressive content. You know what I mean? And it just strikes me that there are signs that Amanda does have kind of a dissociated separation. Like she has a sort of a dissociated alienation from her own, I think, more violent, more wild or savage, internal content. And so I would, even if I couldn't put that into words, I would be looking very carefully at Amanda, and I'm sorry if that's offensive. But I also think that, again, we can't convict someone based on that. That's not enough to convict, but it is enough to look closely. Okay. And then it's up to the police to do a much better job of actually, analyzing the crime scene. And I'm just going to say right now, one of the big things that stood out to me was that the police were able to focus on the genitals in the autopsy. They were able to focus on, Meredith's genital area, and they did find, I think, touch DNA that suggested that definitely connected Rudy to her body, right, to her physical body. But here's the thing: if they had consensual sexual, behavior, let's say if they were just touching each other, there's no evidence of penetration sex, right? There's no evidence they actually had sex. But if they were having, let's say, consensual, like making out, and he was like touching her, maybe even kind of roughly in the genital area, that would explain the touch DNA, right? But what really bothers me about the crime scene is that, sorry about the dogs there, but what really bothers me about the autopsy, is that there was also signs that Meredith's wrists were bruised, that somebody had grabbed her wrists, and that somebody had covered her mouth, and there was signs of somebody having covered her mouth or covered her wrists. And so I wonder if the forensic medical team, okay, if they were very careful not to touch the body too much, just to wrap it up into plastic, get it over to, or just wrap up the body, get it to forensic laboratory. And then for the pathologists or the forensic technicians to look for touch DNA around the wrists and the mouth area, okay? Because that would show who had grabbed her by the wrist, or it would give the potential maybe to connect other people to the crime scene, not just Rudy, because maybe Rudy's only connection to Meredith's body might have been prior to the actual murder, and then maybe he went to the bathroom, okay, and then maybe somebody who happened to be there, maybe the person who was there was listening to them having, like, say, sexual play, and maybe heard sounds that sounded like sex, and maybe that provoked like a rage or something like that. And then as Rudy stepped to the bathroom, maybe very quickly something very violent happened, right? So maybe another person had contact with Meredith's body, right? Maybe grabbed her by the wrist, maybe killed her. And so It really bothers me that in the autopsy, I don't see enough focus on trying to get touch DNA from the areas where there was like a bruising of the wrist or a covering in the mouth, because that would give a more comprehensive analysis of the body to really fully explain the investigator's theory that there were multiple people involved in touching Meredith that night, right? I'm not sure I believe there was like a gang killing or like a sex play game or anything like that, but I do believe that maybe more than one person may have touched her that night, and so I think maybe a more sophisticated forensic team wouldn't have just looked for touch DNA at the genital area, but they also would have looked at all the areas of bruising to see if they could get contact touch DNA that might be connected to other people, right? And because the police, I don't think were careful enough, or the forensic team wasn't careful enough, that's kind of where, in the end, I have to give up my personal, I start to give up myself, in the sense that, I don't see that the investigators did a complete enough job. So even though I have a lot of concerns about Amanda Knox, I have a lot of concerns about her. I think it's too bad that the investigators lost a potential opportunity to possibly connect her physically, as opposed to just doing a psychological profile. Okay, so the only point I'm trying to make here is, I think in terms of a psychological profile, okay, which is legitimate, not to convict, but just to lay it on the table, like who are the potential suspects. Okay, I do think that Amanda is still, in my mind, is still a potential suspect, right? I believe that, and I think she does fit in many ways the profile of somebody who could commit that murder, right? But unfortunately, because the forensic examination, I don't think was complete enough. Okay, I guess I am still left with, I think, reasonable doubt that maybe Amanda, the evidence just doesn't show that she's actually connected to the murder, even though she fits the profile, right? So that's unfortunate, but I still take very seriously. I still take very seriously, the signs that Amanda has, kind of the psychology that I think would make her a very, very fitting candidate to be a suspect for this murder. And, I understand that for Amanda today, that may be very traumatic. I leave it on the table that even if she was responsible for actually killing her roommate, maybe there was some dissociative amnesia, or maybe she just can't emotionally allow herself to connect to that crime. So she's sort of, in a way, permanently sort of removed from ever knowing, maybe, or ever being able to process or face the possibility, right? And I understand that could be very difficult for her. And I'm not even assuming Amanda is a bad person. I'm not going that far. But I do think she has a very troubling eccentricity in her emotional psychology. Like her emotional psychology, to me, is strange enough that I think it could potentially fit the profile for who killed her roommate, for who killed Meredith. Okay. And so I am troubled by that. And what's even more troubling to me is that, and of course, now I have completely let go of any, I don't have any personal, I'm not going to conclude. I have let go of any, say, conclusion that I think Amanda did this. I cannot honestly conclude that, right? I don't think we have enough information. But I also cannot let go of the fact that she fits a profile. Okay, I think she does fit the profile of somebody who could have done it, right? And that's what troubles me about this case. Okay, and so I'm going to show another clip. This is a deep dive. Okay, I'm sure a lot of people aren't going to watch this. This is such a long video, but I'm going to make this a long video, right? And I want to show a couple of additional clips, where even now, Amanda, even just in casual conversation in a podcast, she fully admits that she has discovered, I guess later in life, that she actually is not in touch with her anger. Okay, that her anger is kind of like a remote entity that she doesn't have any sensation of, that she has no awareness of her own anger, that her anger is like a separate entity. Okay, and as we've seen with other crimes, we're looking at, say, the Rex Heuermann crime, and the Rex Heuermann murders, or say the what was it, the one in Colorado? I'm sorry, Chris Watts. The Chris Watts. I almost got the idea that they also were people where it seems like their most violent primal aggression is sort of like kind of like separated from their consciousness. You know what I mean? Like where a person is sort of removed from their own primal savage reality. You know what I mean? And so I think it's very interesting that even today, even when Amanda is just being interviewed just in a podcast, she admits that she has no sensation and no awareness of her own anger. Okay, so I'm going to play a couple of clips, and I'm not going to talk in between them. I'm just going to put a couple of clips, and just so you can just see how even today she actually confirms what we were just guessing. Okay, I was just guessing, just looking at a couple of clips from way back, when she was younger and she was talking about the crime scene. I was just kind of guessing, but now she actually confirms it. And she confirms even today that she just has no sensation of her own, let's say her more savage internal reality, right? So let's take a look at these clips and just see the confirmation that really is, and she admits it, that really is an emotional problem that she does have. So let's take a look at this.
God, I love it. So it's so fun. I love journaling. So I've been doing this practice of trying to do 3 pages of journaling a day. Like you just give yourself however much time it takes, but like you just do it. You don't stop. It's almost like stream of conscious.
Yep.
3 pages, fill 3 pages. And I'm constantly surprised by how much stuff I'm pissed off about that just comes out that I'm like, I didn't even know I was pissed off about that.
I hate journaling. This is so
This is
fucking
so-
boring.
Yeah.
Like, and it just practices the, I think, art of processing something as soon as you feel it.
And then putting it out. And so you don't like have it weirdly harboring inside of you and becoming a weird resentment that came out of nowhere while you're having lunch with your husband.
Yeah, so that to me is weird because Whitney Cummings, she's trying to say, oh, it's so important to process things as soon as you feel them. And then Amanda's reaction, and then get it out and then put it out. Amanda's like, oh yeah, but then put it out. Like her primal instinct is that emotional stuff, uncomfortable emotions have to be put out, and so I just think that's something we just can't really ignore, in this case, that even when Amanda is trying to be therapeutic, and even when she's trying to be introspective and to learn about herself, even then the idea of processing emotions, okay, if you have to deal with it, but then just get it out, just get it out. So that to me tells me that she has almost like a frantic allergy. Like she's frantically allergic to having serious emotional content in her central present consciousness. She just has to get that stuff out, So let's look at a little more, and you'll just see repeatedly how she admits having, I think she confirms having this just really, really strange, like lack of sensation of her own kind of primal, maybe more savage dimension to her personality, right? And so let's look at this next one.
I think it's about like the magic of what comes out of
and then you put it away. Yeah, no, but I'm definitely with you. Like I've absolutely started journal entries being like, I swear I'm not an angry person. I swear I'm actually really happy. And like these are the things, like I'm going to go out of my way, all the things I'm grateful for. But then let me just,
But if you put a little gold flakes in a man's coffee, it'll kill him instantly.
Okay. And I mean, there it's even kind of funny because Whitney Cummings, she even makes almost like a joke about homicide, and it's funny because it almost seems like Amanda wants to laugh, but she kind of knows she can't really laugh at that. So that is kind of, that's kind of troubling. But, the bottom line is, look, I mean, she, I think it's now confirmed. I mean, even Amanda now confirms that she has, really kind of a strange emotional problem where she really just is not comfortable. And she is not comfortable letting disturbing emotional content into her central consciousness. She's not comfortable with that, but that she's not even aware of the sensation of her anger. Okay. And that she has to like bring it out through the mechanics of doing a journal, that otherwise she wouldn't have any sensation of her anger. Okay. And that when she does have even an awareness of her anger, she just wants to get it out, and that she, I think even Whitney Cummings is more comfortable with her own like homicidal ideation, and she can even laugh about it. I don't think Amanda is there. So, you can see that she has that problem. And then, obviously I talked about this in an earlier video, but there's a recent BBC interview of Amanda where she's asked specifically to talk about her feelings about Meredith, okay? And instead of just responding with her feelings, okay, her answer is, oh my, oh my. It's like, oh my, and now we know. Now that we really understand Amanda's even her confessed emotional difficulties, we can see that just the idea of having to get in touch with her feelings towards Meredith, oh my God, it's like, oh my, like I don't want to have to touch that. Like that really bothers me, So it's interesting. Let's take a look at that clip so you can see how she responds. When she's asked to talk about Meredith, it's like her first reaction is not how she feels, but it's like, oh my God, I have to bring feelings into myself, And you can see that allergy. She has such an allergy to having disturbing emotional content like present in her consciousness. It really bothers her. And she can't do it. And then she says, like she goes back into her trance. She goes back into her self-hypnosis, and it's like this hypnotic statement, this hypnotic, she kind of tries to get her mind convinced that, and I put myself in Meredith's shoes, and I always put myself in Meredith's shoes, and when she says that, and I invite you guys to watch this and see for yourselves, is she really saying that she puts herself in Meredith's shoes, or is she just proposing? Does she want to believe? And she just declares before the world a declaration. My declaration is that I put myself in Meredith's shoes. Okay, now I agree that Amanda declares and probably wants to put herself in Meredith's shoes, but you can tell that she just talks about it, and then as soon as she elaborates on what it means to put herself in Meredith's shoes, she can't say a damn thing that actually comes from being in Meredith's shoes. She goes right back to talking about herself and saying, oh, I could have been killed that night. You know what I mean? So in other words, even when she declares that she wants to go into Meredith's shoes, she just can't go there. You know what I mean? So let's take a look at that.
I'm very aware this week is the anniversary, 14 years since Meredith Kercher was murdered. How do you think of her? I don't know if you do anything to mark it, or what do you think about when you think of Meredith?
Oh my. I mean, this year, it's funny, all of the years leading up to this, I have always, whenever I've thought about this day and this day of like remembrance, I've always put myself in Meredith's shoes. And even just the fact that if I had been there that night, I could have been murdered as well.
Okay, so at least my impression is that Amanda proposes that she puts herself in Meredith's shoes. Okay, but as she approaches actually putting herself in Meredith's shoes, she just talks about herself. Okay, because it's not because she's just so selfish. I don't think that. I don't actually think Amanda is a traditional narcissist. I think she is narcissistic. But I think the reason why she can't go to another person's shoes, at least in this case, is because that would be way too painful for her. And I don't think she has. I think she's so allergic to disturbing feelings, she just can't go there. That would just be too painful. And so later on in this interview, she talks about putting herself in Meredith's mom's shoes, like literally putting herself in Meredith's mother's shoes. Okay. And you can tell once again, she proposes it, and she even gets a little bit emotional. And I'm going to assume it's genuine emotion. I don't have any reason to think it's fake emotion. Okay. Although she may be using her genuine emotion in a manipulative way. Okay. I think she has an agenda here. So she's using her emotion, but she has emotion. But as soon as she proposes putting herself in Meredith's mother's shoes, she immediately talks about her children, her own world. She doesn't quite get there to Meredith's mother's actual situation. And then it's so funny because she says, that maybe for my child can grow up in a world that's better for her than it was for me. And then she goes, oh, I'm sorry, for Meredith. You know what I mean? Like she corrects herself. Like she's trying to pretend to be empathetic, but she can only really honestly say, how everything is for her. I want my daughter to grow up in a world that's better for her than it was for me. Oh, I'm sorry, for Meredith. Okay, so let's watch that. It's very interesting.
But this year, I've been thinking about Meredith's mom. It's the first year that I've put myself in Meredith's mom's shoes, and I'm thinking about that for my own daughter. How I want the world to be a better place for her than it was for me. and that it was for Meredith.
Okay, so I think what we're seeing here is that Amanda, she can have feelings, and she does have feelings, but she is allergic to, I think, what we might call really disturbing feelings, right? So if she wants to think about her own children and be nostalgic about how the world was a bad place for her, and she doesn't want the world to be a bad place for her own children, she can admit those feelings. That's the kind of sentiment that at least is in the comfort zone for, for Amanda. But to actually put herself in Meredith's shoes, or to really, really think about her true feelings about Meredith, or let alone to put herself in Meredith's mother's shoes, I don't think she can go there. I think she can only like reflect back on her own comfort zone, which is her own family, her own children. But that's about as far as she can go. I think she's just too allergic, and I think it's just too, I guess, traumatizing. For Amanda to really go so far as to admit, like, really, I would say, really disturbing emotions into her consciousness. I think she has to, like she said in the Whitney Cummings podcast, put it away, just put it away. I think that's her go-to. I think that's her default, basically. Now, the thing is that unfortunately, when you put things away, okay, you don't gain more power, you actually lose power. Okay, so if Amanda was really upset or really enraged by something that happened with her roommate Meredith, okay, and if she had, like, say, like a really savage rage, going on, even though it would be her instinct to put it away, okay, Amanda would not be gaining power that way. She would actually be losing control, okay, because that disembodied rage actually has more power potentially than if it has to sit uncomfortably harboring in your internal self, And so I know Amanda doesn't want that, okay, and she feels like she gains power by ejecting, and dislocating and sort of putting away, like, really, really disturbing, savage, aggressive thoughts or aggressive feelings. But she actually doesn't really gain power, because when something becomes disembodied, now you don't contain it. Now it is just acting on its own. And so I could imagine a situation where if something did happen where, let's say, Amanda had like this explosive reaction, to something that enraged her about her roommate, potentially it would be so disembodied from her that she potentially could have, I think, maybe potentially some kind of like dissociative amnesia, and really either not remember it or not be able to emotionally process it. And I know people are going to criticize me, okay, and they're going to say, what do you mean emotionally process? Okay, you either remember or you don't remember. Okay, you either remember or you don't remember. What do you mean? It's either amnesia or you remember, okay? And I think people need to understand that, I think in our legal system, even in our psychology as we know it, okay, I think we have this really naive concept that you're either full-blown crazy or you're sane, okay? And there's nothing intermediate. There's nothing in the middle. And I can just tell you, having come from my own family, okay, my own family where we've had mental issues, we're not full on insane people. I don't come from an insane family, but I come from a family with emotional issues and violence. Okay, I had violence in my family, right? And I can tell you there is a middle ground. And I think a lot of us know this. Okay, I think we're in denial. Okay, there is a middle ground between full insanity, okay, and just being sane. Okay, I think there is a middle ground. And I can tell you that there are people who have trouble emotionally accepting things, even if they're not in full amnesia. Okay. Like my father, I'll talk about my father. My father actually spanked. He didn't just spank us. He could be kind of physically violent. Okay. And it's funny because my dad also had, kind of a public persona where he wanted to be very proper. He wanted to be a very, respected person, and he would tell me with a straight face, he'd say, John, he would say, I never spanked any of my kids. I never spanked you guys. Never once did I lose my temper, and I can remember so many times when he didn't just lose his temper, but he spanked the crap out of us. I mean, and it's so funny because he said it with a straight face, oh, I never hit you guys. I'm so proud of that. And, I can't say that my dad has amnesia. It's not that he has amnesia. It's not that he's psychotic. It's not that he has a split personality. It's just that I think some people do have trouble emotionally processing. And I think the denial mechanisms are pretty strong, so you don't have to be full on crazy to have something kind of, yeah, I'm sure he could technically remember it, but we have to, as a public, we have to be more honest, okay, that there is a middle ground between full insanity and just perfect sanity, right? Perfect sanity and full crazy, right? There is a middle ground where people, they can say with a straight face things because they don't want to emotionally accept. Okay. And it doesn't mean a full amnesia. Okay. It's just emotional acceptance. And some people have a lot of trouble with that. Okay. And so, I'm sorry. It's, I didn't make the world that way. It's not my fault, but the world is that way. And I think there is a middle ground between, full insanity and people who really are just perfectly sane. I think, and I think Amanda Knox, she may not be totally insane. She may not have a split personality, but I think she may have some serious emotional issues. And it's very interesting. In another podcast, she admitted, and she didn't seem to take it very seriously, but she admitted that her grandmother was like seriously abused by her great grandmother, by her great great grandmother. Okay. She admits just in passing that the grandmother of her grandmother, okay, her grandmother told Amanda that her own grandmother had tried to drown her. Okay. I mean, I don't think that makes anybody a psychopath. It just means, in families, there can be weird, embarrassing, violent things. Okay. And that it may be something that we have to think about, as just regular people. I'm not a perfect person. Okay. I've been diagnosed as having a personality disorder. I know I'm not a perfect person. A lot of people have addiction issues, behavior issues, anger management issues. And some people, like Amanda, they may be allergic to emotions, and that their most disturbing emotional states are completely disembodied from their consciousness. They can't even sense it, and under a perfect storm, that could really lead to something scary, unless they try to get better, And so let's listen to this clip, because I think this is actually pretty fascinating. Okay, let's check this out.
You're German?
German.
Yeah. See, it's why you should
The
have
birthing hips.
You should have just said that. I wanted you to just go like, I have German ancestry. I don't know what to tell you. We can see horrible things and like do cartwheels.
No, truly. I mean, even just like talking to my Oma about like her.
What's Oma is grandma?
Grandma, yeah. My Oma, like her mom had a bomb drop on her, and then her own mother or her own grandmother who took care of her afterward tried to drown her in a bathtub. Like my Oma talks about like these tragic things that happened in her life, like, oh yeah, whatever, like whatever. And then like for me, I get deer in headlights syndrome where like something like I've never had anything bad happen to me.
Okay, so now how do we interpret that? Okay, I've never had anything bad happen to me. Okay, I think the best way to interpret that, now we know that's not really true. We know her parents actually had a divorce. We know that in life, bad things will happen. Okay, so that's not really true. The way to interpret that, I believe, is that bad stuff doesn't happen to me. Is what she's saying. Bad stuff is not part of me. I don't let bad stuff be part of me, right? Oh, my grandmother, she had this tragic stuff. She kind of summarizes it like it's nothing, when in reality, it's pretty disturbing. I mean, now she doesn't have to go crazy over it. I mean, all of us, I think, can have some things in our ancestry that are really crazy. Like I have an ancestor that committed suicide during the Great Depression, I mean, pretty scary. And the way he did it, it was just, I can just say it's something very disturbing for the family, But I'm not just going to say, oh, just a tragedy, it just happened. No, I mean, these are disturbing things that are part of our family history. And then it's sort of like the contrast, but nothing bad has ever happened to me. I think what she's really saying is that bad things don't happen to me. Bad things don't come into me. Bad things are away. I'm away. I'm sort of separate from bad things, And I think that, to summarize this, I think it's pretty clear that, that Amanda has emotional issues. Okay. I don't think she's a psychopath. I think she may have little psychopathic traits. I think she may have some narcissistic traits, but I think that her fundamental problem, the core issue for her, is probably not listed in the DSM. Okay. I don't think in the DSM there's like emotional allergy disorder. All right. But I think she has an allergy to disturbing emotion. I think she really will not tolerate disturbing emotion. And so things that are vicious, things that are really savage, that are really aggressive, that are really violent, I think they get dissociated, and she has no sense of them. She cannot sense those more savage parts of her, right? And so those things are sort of disembodied, right? And in a way, she does not gain control by ejecting those things out into a dissociated distance, okay? She actually loses control, because potentially those things could take over, and it would be like the other thing in me did it, like that was that thing that did it, not me, you know what I mean? And so it could be potentially very dangerous. But I don't think she's a psychopath, and I think this is just a big lesson for us. I think I think in a way, this is sort of like the Lizzie Borden case of our generation, right? You know, if you guys will remember the Lizzie Borden case, this was you know, the late 1800s. This is Victorian New England, right? This is Victorian New England. I can't remember the town in Massachusetts, I think it was, but let's just say it was Massachusetts, or let's just say it was New England. Okay, it's a upper middle class person, kind of like similar to Amanda Knox, right? Kind of really well put together, never had any history of any criminality. She was a part of a church. You know, she was an upstanding member of the community, and apparently, well, somehow, you know, her stepmother and her father ended up chopped up with a hatchet, right? And it was either going to be her or it was going to be the maid. You know, there was only a few people who could have done it. You know, unless some stranger just came into the house, which doesn't seem very likely, right? And there was some evidence that suggested that Lizzie Borden could have been responsible, because they found like a bucket full of blood and articles of clothing. Okay, but Lizzie Borden was very careful to say, "Oh, that's my menstrual blood," you know. And I guess people just didn't want to touch that because that seems so shameful, you know. And then later on, Lizzie Borden and her sister apparently had burned a dress or an article of clothing, and they gave a really not very convincing excuse for that. So it seemed very suspicious. Okay, but because there wasn't really any obvious evidence, there was no eyewitness to the crime. And I guess maybe because, and this is similar to Amanda Knox, you know, because Lizzie Borden seemed like such an upstanding, well put together, such a superficially nice person. People just couldn't believe that some other entity could sort of appear and take over and do some horrible crime, you know. But after Lizzie Borden was acquitted, and she was acquitted, so in a sense, you could say she's just as exonerated as Amanda Knox. You know, Lizzie Borden, and you know, by the terms of American law, through acquittal, let's say she was exonerated in the same way that Amanda Knox will now claim she's been exonerated, right? So I think everybody had a big doubt about Lizzie Borden. You know, you can't prove that she did it, but there's a huge idea that she did, right? And I think the same thing is true here with Amanda Knox. We can't prove that she did this, you know, but like Lizzie Borden, Amanda Knox has to live forever, okay, with that uncomfortable reality that there are a lot of things about her personality that fit a profile that could explain the murder, right? I'm not saying it's absolutely true, okay? I'm not saying she could be convicted on that, but I think all of us know that there are things about her personality that could fit the profile of who killed Meredith Kercher. So in a way, she's sort of like the Lizzie Borden of our time. You know, and that has to be very uncomfortable for Amanda, you know. But I guess if we can learn anything from this, and I'm sure all the true crime people are going to dislike me for what I'm going to say, but what I'm going to say is I think our legal system, and I think our psychological, I think the psychology community, I think could become more sophisticated, right? And I think we could start to bridge that big gap that we have in the law between full insanity, right, and full sanity, like full crazy and full sanity, right? I think we still want to look at things in very black and white terms, and you can only get a defense, and you can only have diminished capacity in the eyes of the law if you're just full insane and if you have a full, split personality, right? We don't want to accept a middle ground, okay? Because I think we're afraid that a lot of really bad people will find out that they have a lot of mental problems, right? I think we're afraid of that. I think we want to have a place to put bad people, right? And we don't want to question it. They're just bad people. It's not psychology. It's just they're bad people, right? And I think, unfortunately, Amanda Knox falls into that middle range between what we want to call bad people and what we should call people that have mental and emotional problems, right? She's kind of in that middle ground. And I think in a way that leaves us with a sense that maybe justice has been done, right? Because if our legal system can't come up with a middle ground to address people who do have emotional problems, right? So they don't have to be full crazy, right? And they don't have to be fully bad, right? Then we might be able to incentivize people like Amanda to maybe confess because they know they're not going to be treated like a bad person, right? They may just be treated by somebody who unfortunately had an accident, had a very bad incident. And the idea would be, what can be done to help somebody like that, right? And I just think that today, as it stands today, I think our legal system is just not up to that. We're just not up to that. We just haven't reached a point where we're willing to play with that middle ground because I think we want to make people bad and we want to just put them in jail, right? But once in a while, we'll see a case where somebody really, I think, is in that middle ground between being full crazy and just a criminal, just a bad person. There is kind of a middle ground. And I think, people like Lizzie Borden, people like Amanda Knox, these kind of mysterious people, they're acquitted, but we think they fit the profile, and I think it's just an uncomfortable case. And so, that's pretty much my position. I think she does fit the profile. Okay. But I don't think there's enough information to actually absolutely prove that she killed Meredith Kercher. Right. I just don't think so, And so it's a very uncomfortable case, and I think we should try to learn from it. Any of us who are in that middle ground between, let's say, just being a bad person and being, like, say, a totally crazy person. I consider myself to be in that middle ground, right? I think I live in that middle ground. I'm not a bad person, I don't think, okay? But I'm not really, and I'm also not a crazy person, okay? But I'm also not a good person. I'm not an entirely good person, right? And I think I live in that middle ground where I maybe get close to being a bad person, or maybe I am sort of touching or even overlapping with what could be considered a bad person, right? And I just think that our legal system and our community and our society, and I think the law and psychology should be able to find a middle ground where we can start to talk about people who live in that gray area between just being a bad person and being a crazy person, And so, my final assessment on this, I think I'm making it very clear. I think Amanda Knox does fit the profile. Okay, I do think that. And I think she has issues in her own family and her own emotional issues that I think she doesn't take seriously enough, I'll be honest, right? But I think a lot of us may have similar issues that are very uncomfortable to accept, because if we do accept them publicly, people are going to think we're bad, okay? And they are going to see us as a monster. And I think in the end, maybe that's a little bit too extreme. Maybe Amanda Knox is not a monster. Maybe she's not a psychopath, but she may have some very serious emotional issues, okay? And so that's pretty much my summary, that, I do think she could very much fit the profile of a person who could have killed Amanda Kercher. Okay. And I do think that, the complexity of the crime scene, where it looks like it could have been that what looks like breaking into the house, it could have been a staged, it could have been, the house could have been staged to look like there was a break-in. Right. And so all of a sudden there's this question, and there's other issues like why would Rudy leave feces, in the toilet? So there's all these questions that might explain how maybe Rudy was doing something consensual with Meredith, and then when he was in the bathroom, something very quickly, very violent happened, and Rudy just found himself in the middle of a much more complicated situation. So I'm not saying that's what happened, but I'm saying there's enough like problems with the evidence of the crime scene that could be a possibility. Okay. And then combine that with the fact that Amanda does have a personality and psychological profile that I think could be consistent with this murder. So it is a very uncomfortable conclusion, right? We can't say for sure that she did it, but we also can't ignore that, like Lizzie Borden, she kind of does sort of fit the profile for who could have done it. So it's a very uncomfortable case. And I really appreciate your patience. I don't want to make long videos. This is the only long video I think I'm going to make for a long time, because I don't think it's necessary. I don't want to take such deep dives, but I think this case was very interesting and probably deserved this extra attention. So I really appreciate your patience, and thanks for watching.